One signature destroyed my marriage, but it also exposed the biggest mistake my husband would ever make. When I came home from settling my late grandmother's estate, I expected to celebrate with the man I'd loved for 11 years. Instead, he slid divorce papers across the dining table while my mother-in-law smiled like she'd already won. They proudly told me they'd sold my house without my permission and that I had nowhere left to go. They thought they'd stolen my future. They had no idea they had just sold the only property they were never supposed to touch, and everything that happened next was entirely their own doing. My name is Emily Harrison. I'm 33 years old, and until 6 weeks ago, I believed I had built the kind of life people quietly envied. My husband, Daniel, and I had been married for 11 years. We lived in a beautiful home outside Denver, hosted family dinners, celebrated anniversaries, and smiled through photographs that made us look perfectly happy. Looking back now, I realize pictures can hide almost anything. 3 weeks earlier, my grandmother Eleanor passed away at 91. She wasn't just my grandmother. She was the person who taught me resilience, patience, and how to trust actions more than words. She left me in charge of settling her estate in Aspen, so I spent nearly 2 weeks there meeting attorneys, signing probate documents, and sorting through decades of memories. Daniel insisted he couldn't come because work was too busy. At the time, I believed him. We still texted every evening, but something felt different. His replies became shorter. His calls ended quickly. Whenever I mentioned the estate, he changed the subject almost immediately. I blamed grief. I told myself everyone handled loss differently. When the paperwork was finally complete, I drove home expecting nothing more than a quiet evening with my husband. I even stopped at his favorite bakery outside Boulder and bought the cinnamon rolls he always requested after my trips. As I pulled into the driveway, I noticed 2 unfamiliar luxury SUVs parked beside the house. The curtains were open. People were inside. I smiled, thinking Daniel had planned some kind of surprise. I couldn't have been more wrong. Before I even reached the front door, my mother-in-law looked straight at me, smiled, and quietly said, "You're too late." I stepped inside, still holding the bakery box, and immediately felt the air shift. Daniel was sitting at the dining table in a pressed blue shirt, looking strangely calm. Beside him sat his mother, Linda, wearing the same smug expression she'd had every time she thought she'd won an argument. Across from them were 2 people in business suits gathering folders into expensive leather briefcases. No one greeted me. Daniel slowly slid a thick envelope across the table. "I've filed for divorce," he said, his voice almost rehearsed. For a moment, I honestly thought he was joking. Then Linda leaned back in her chair and smiled. "I told him not to wait," she said. "You were never good enough for my son." I looked down and saw my name printed across the divorce petition. Before I could even process it, Linda delivered another blow. "Oh, and there's something else." She folded her hands together as if announcing wonderful family news. "The house has already been sold. The buyers signed everything this morning." I stared at her. "Our house?" I asked quietly. Daniel nodded once. "It was the smartest decision. Once the divorce is final, we'll split what's left. You'll need to find somewhere else to live." Linda laughed softly. "You spent 2 weeks chasing an old inheritance while losing everything that actually mattered." Neither of them noticed I wasn't reacting the way they expected. I wasn't crying. I wasn't begging. I simply looked at Daniel and asked one calm question. "Which house did you sell?" He frowned, clearly confused. "Our Denver house," he answered. "The only one that matters." A strange sense of relief washed over me. For the first time since walking through the door, I smiled. Daniel's confident expression disappeared. "What are you smiling about?" he asked. I looked directly at Daniel and set the bakery box on the kitchen counter. "You really think you won, don't you?" I asked. Linda crossed her arms. "We know we won." I nodded slowly because, in their minds, everything probably looked perfect. Then my grandmother's voice echoed inside my head. "Money doesn't change people, Emily. It reveals them. Promise me you'll never tell anyone how I've structured my estate unless they give you a reason." At the time, I thought she was simply being cautious. Now I understood exactly what she meant. A year before she passed away, she invited me to her Aspen library. Legal folders covered the dining table, while her attorney patiently explained trust agreements, ownership records, and property protections that honestly sounded overwhelming. Grandmother smiled when she noticed my confusion. "You don't need to remember every paragraph," she said. "Just remember one thing." She tapped a single blue folder. "Never let anyone convince you that appearances tell the whole story." She explained that her estate had been divided carefully. The Aspen property, several investment accounts, family heirlooms, and another piece of real estate that almost everyone ignored because it looked ordinary compared to the mountain estate. What nobody knew was that this overlooked property controlled access to several trust provisions connected to the inheritance. Only the trustee could authorize anything involving it. That trustee was me. Back in my dining room, Daniel confidently folded his arms. "The buyer's already signed," he said. "Everything's finished." I looked at him without raising my voice. "No," I replied. "You sold the only property you never had the legal authority to sell." The room fell completely silent. Linda's smile disappeared. Daniel blinked twice before laughing nervously. "That's impossible." Before I could answer, my phone began ringing. The screen displayed one name: Margaret Collins, estate attorney. I answered immediately. "Emily," Margaret said, her voice calm but unmistakably urgent. "Where are you right now?" "I'm at my house." "Good. Don't sign anything. Don't leave. And whatever you do, don't argue with anyone." "I'm already on my way." Daniel smirked. "Calling your lawyer won't change anything." Margaret ignored him. "The title company contacted my office 20 minutes ago. They discovered documents submitted by someone who claimed authority to transfer trust property." My stomach stayed steady. "I assumed that might happen," I said. Daniel's confidence slipped just enough for me to notice. Margaret continued. "The transaction has been frozen. Escrow is suspended. No funds have been released." Linda stood up, so quickly her chair scraped across the hardwood floor. "Frozen?" she asked. Margaret heard her. "Yes, ma'am. The property listed in the sale is held by the Eleanor Harrison Family Trust. It cannot legally be sold without the trustee's written authorization." I quietly said, "I'm the trustee." Silence. Daniel looked from me to the paperwork spread across the table. "That's impossible," he said. "The realtor never mentioned any trust." Margaret answered before I could. "The trust was clearly recorded with the county years ago. Every licensed title search would have revealed it." Linda's face drained of color. "But the buyers already signed." "They did," Margaret replied. "Which means they now have every reason to pursue legal remedies against anyone who misrepresented ownership." Daniel ran both hands through his hair. "This is just paperwork. It'll be fixed." "No," Margaret said evenly. "This stopped being paperwork the moment unauthorized signatures were used to transfer protected property." A heavy knock echoed through the front door. Daniel walked over and opened it. Two sharply dressed attorneys stepped inside. One introduced himself. "I'm David Mercer, counsel for the buyers." He placed a folder on the table. "We have several very serious questions." The room stayed silent as David Mercer opened the folder and spread several documents across the dining table. "We represent the buyers," he said evenly. "Before taking further action, we'd like to understand exactly how this transaction was presented." Daniel straightened his shoulders. "It was my house. I had every right to sell it." David looked at him for a long moment before sliding another document forward. "Our title investigators disagree." Margaret stepped beside me and calmly pointed to the recorded trust agreement. "The property has been protected for years. Mr. Harrison had no legal authority to transfer ownership." David nodded. "Our clients entered this transaction in good faith. They relied on representations that now appear to be inaccurate." Linda suddenly leaned forward. "There has to be some misunderstanding." "There isn't," David replied. He removed printed emails from his file. "We also received communications encouraging the buyers to close quickly before Mrs. Harrison returned from Aspen." My eyes moved to Linda. She immediately looked away. Margaret quietly handed David another folder. "These are text messages recovered during our review." Daniel's face lost what little color remained. Several messages showed Linda pushing him to finish everything before Emily gets home and promising that once the sale closed, she won't have anything left to fight over. No one spoke. The silence was far louder than any argument. David closed the folder. My clients have instructed me to begin seeking recovery for every financial loss connected to this failed transaction. Daniel finally turned toward me. Emily, this doesn't have to become a war. It was the first time he'd spoken my name without confidence. I looked at him carefully. For 11 years, I thought I knew the man standing across from me. Now I realized something painful. This wasn't remorse. He wasn't sorry for betraying me. He was terrified because the plan had failed. Then I reached into my briefcase. There is one document, I said quietly, that changes everything. I opened the blue folder my grandmother had told me to protect. Margaret carefully removed a single notarized document and placed it in front of everyone. This, she said, is the final trust amendment. Daniel stared at it without speaking. Margaret continued. It clearly states that if anyone knowingly attempts to transfer, conceal, or profit from trust property without authorization, every discretionary financial benefit connected to that individual is permanently revoked. Daniel looked at me in disbelief. What does that even mean? It means, Margaret replied calmly, you are never entitled to inherit, manage, or benefit from anything connected to Mrs. Harrison's estate. Any possibility ended the moment you attempted this sale. Linda's shoulders slumped. So, there's nothing left? There never was, I answered quietly. You just assumed there would be. The silence that followed felt heavier than every argument we'd ever had. Daniel buried his face in his hands. The confidence, arrogance, and certainty he'd carried all afternoon disappeared in seconds. He hadn't secured a fortune. He had destroyed his own future. The buyers were pursuing their legal remedies. The divorce would proceed. My grandmother's estate remained exactly where she intended it to remain. I looked around the room one last time. For years, I believed losing my marriage would break me. Instead, it revealed something far more valuable. I had never been the one with everything to lose. Daniel was. And he finally understood it. As I reached the front door, Daniel's voice stopped me. Emily, is there anything I can do to fix this? I turned around one last time. There was, I said quietly. You could have loved me more than what you thought you could take from me. No one spoke. I walked outside, closed the door behind me, and breathed deeper than I had in years. 6 months later, the divorce was final. My grandmother's estate remained protected, my design studio continued to grow, and my life was finally peaceful. He thought he had stolen my future. Instead, he signed away his own.